Inflation Part 1, the trial and learning continues. Because of all of the recent news stories about inflation, I wanted to go ahead and investigate it a little deeper because I know I don't understand it near as well as I would like to. So I started to develop the model, and what I wanted to understand was inflation. And I remembered that the typical supply-demand model is a couple of balancing loops interacting so that demand and supply interact to determine the price, and the price then determines the supply and the future demand, so that if price increases, supply increases. An increase in supply diminishes the price, and a decrease in price increases demand, which then increases the price. And because of the delays involved in this structure, it acts like one large reinforcing loop, and it oscillates back and forth. And when the price increases, the definition of inflation is an increase in price which continues over an extended period of time. So this was the model that I started with, and then during one of the peer mentoring group meetings that I participate in a couple weeks ago, we elaborated this model to add all of these additional relationships. And yet there was something about the model that just continued to grate on me, and it just didn't sit well. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I remembered that this basic structure for supply and demand interacting through price was actually an indecision archetype. And I went back to my InsightMaker implementation of that archetype and ran through the story itself in terms of it begins with the result one. Well, it was done as a generalized structure as opposed to actually talking about supply and demand, so that this reinforcing or two balancing loops then is equivalent to this simulation model, which when then simulated, so that over time this result one and result two resolve to a given steady state if you don't stress it too large. Though if you introduce the delays into the system so that it reacts to historical information as opposed to current information, as I said, the structure begins to oscillate. And the more that you do this, let me start over again. The more that you do this, the greater the delays, the more that it oscillates. And as you increase the factor or the rate at which you respond to it, it can actually get quite out of control. If I link this and then begin to change this, you can see that the structure simply goes out of control. Though, even if I change the supply and demand so that if result one is the demand and I increase the demand, all right, and I increase the delay so that the supply doesn't develop to meet the demand in a timely manner, it doesn't matter what I do, it still oscillates back and forth, so that the structure is not going to present the kind of inflation that we see regardless of what I do to that number of variables. And what I finally realized was that I violated my own first rule of developing models, which is don't assume what the structure looks like. Follow the relationships and allow the relationships to uncover or unfold what the model actually looks like, so that initially deciding that inflation was operating out of this particular structure was a fault on my part, and I never should have done it. So that I'm now back to square one, redefining the model based upon starting with inflation and following the relationships, as opposed to putting the structure in to begin with. And I'll let you know how that turns out in a couple of days. So hope you found my disaster of some interest, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye.